This is Gemara Nazir Daf Chof Zayin, and we really pick it up in the very bottom of Chavavim and Beis as we are turning over to Chav Zayin and Aleph. But just to remind us, because we're actually in the middle of a long sugya that took us really back to the Mishnah Chav Dalid that said Ma'is Stumin Ar Yiplu Linidava. And Rav Yechlan and Daf Chafei explain what is the reason for this din. It's a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Yesterday we digressed and said, is this halacha l'Moshe Misinai specifically here by Naziris, or is it applicable elsewhere? So let's just remind ourselves, what is the halacha l'Moshe Misinai? We have someone that separates money for the karbanos of a Nazir. 3 karbanos of a Nazir, chatas, asham, and oila. The Mishnah dealt particularly with a woman that separated the money, and then what happened, her husband was made for Nadarim. The same thing would apply if someone separated the money and then they were nifter. And now the question is, what do we do with that money? So said the Mishnah, what we do with that money is, it is yiblu linidava, that is used for karbanos of oila, of the kayitz of the Mizbeach. Dessert, you always had to make sure the Mizbeach was well fed. There was always karbanos. So whenever all the karbanos finished, they brought oilas. And the chiddush over here is that the karbanos of a Nazir, like we said, are chatas, shlamim, and oila, those 3 karbanos. And we're using the money for the nadava, which is an oila. Now, the din that we're going to talk about more particular is that this din is only said rava by money, ma'is stumim, but not when it comes to if someone separated a carbon. The din of, this is where Rav Huna explains the din of rava. Let's just dive right there. This is only if someone separates money, but if someone separates an animal, a behema, then the din does not apply. Question is, what type of animal? Is it only an animal of a mum, an animal of a tam? We'll deal with that more in a moment. We ended off yesterday in the bottom of Chav Vav Amid Beis with the question of Rav Sima Bar Ashi Lirav Papa. So let's pick it up from there. Chav Vav Amid Beis. We are 6 lines from the bottom. My taimayu dirabon. What is, says Rav Sima Bar Ashi to Rav Papa, what is the reason of all the Rabbanan that we just quoted, which we're going to explain their din in a moment, Ta'amri, that they say, Ma'is v'loi behema v'loi nascha, that when we said this din of Rav Yechlan, this halacha l'Moshe Misinai is only by money, and not if someone separates an animal or someone separates a bar of silver as well. Ma'is v'loi savra, money, svara, and not a pile of beams, meaning only actual cash we think right now. But other items, which are money substitutes, I could sell my animal to buy other animals, I could sell my bar of silver, I could sell my pile of beams. The din of Rav Yechlan would not apply. So on that, asks Rav Simi Bar Ashi to Rav Papa, Elameata, Ma'is Layayfais. So we should say that this din is only by money. Again, the din of Ma'is Stumin. Now when someone separates money, and now that money is left over, what do we do with it? We use it in a dava for karbanos, sibur of karbanos of oila. So why don't we as well say, ask Rav Sima Rashi to Rav Papa for lines at the bottom of Chavav and Beis, why don't we as well say it's only by ma'is and not oifais and not birds? V'chitema. And maybe you'll tell me, I apologize, that the highlighting is not working. Maybe you'll tell me it's true. It's only by money, not birds. Elaha. So here's the question. The Amar Rav Chisda taught Rav Chisda that what happens if someone separates 2 birds, kinim, a pair of birds, for their oila, for their asham, or I should say, more particularly, for their chatas and for their oila. More particular, that's always what the kainim are. And he did not designate which is which. So ein akinim isparashais, they're not designated. Ella, one of 2 ways you could have these birds and label them. Chatas, label them oila. Ibelakichas bailim. Either the owner says, this is a chatas, this is an oila, or ibasiyas koyin, or the koyin takes these birds, the birds which have no defining factor, they do not have a label, and what? The koyin goes and says, this is the oila, and this is the chatas. But the question is, hama'is gemirilan. We just said it's only money. only money should have the din of ma'is stumim. So right now, this question, this is the detail that we didn't explain yesterday, which let's delve into right now, because we have to understand this as we're going to turn on to today's Daf of Chav Zayin, is we're now extending the word stam and mefurash. We're taking the din that we learned about ma'is stumim yiplul and adava, that the excess money which does not have a label on it is brought as an adava, and now we are extending that din to the word stam. And we're saying that these karbanos should be considered mifurash, because it should be ma'is, money, v'loi kinim, and not birds. And therefore, if I have these birds, they should not have a leap, they should not be stam, and they should be considered mifurash. What's the difference if it's stam mifurash? Why? Who cares? Difference is in this din. Because if the birds were considered mefurash, they're chatas and an ayla, but we don't know which is which, then the kain would never be able to go and say, oh, this is the ayla, this is the chatas. The kain, you don't have the power, you don't know which is the ayla, which is the chatas, if it had a din of mefurash. So asks the Gemara that if the defining factor is money is the only thing that has a din of stam, but not other things, how will this work with the din of Rav Chisda? And with that we turn over to Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, and says the Gemara, Omar Lei. So Rav Papa answers. Again, the question to Rav Papa was that if we translate the words ma'is stumim only to refer to money and not to other entities, so as Rav Simi Rashi, that Rav Chisda's din seems to imply otherwise, as Rav Chisda allowed the kayin to determine which bird, is the ayla, and which is the chatas. But if ma'is v'loy behema, ma'is should be even not oifais, and then how could the kayin take the bird and designate which is the chatas and the ayla? Seemingly should already be called mifurash, which thereby cannot be designated later. So Amar Lei Rav Papa responds, if you're right, Rav Simi, Haditanan, that which we learned to the Mishnah of Shimon Gamliel, Omer, Hevi Shalosh Behemais. Says Rav Shimon Gamliel, what do we learn? The Mishnah, this is a Mishnah later on in Maseches Nazir, that Rav Shimon Gamliel teaches us that if a Nazir brings 3 animals, and he doesn't specify which animal is for which carbon, which is the ayla, which is the chatos, which is the shlamim, what do we do? Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah over there on Daf Mem Hey, Haru yelachatos tikarev chatos ulayla tikarev ayla l'shlamim tikarev shlamim. Each animal we use for that which it is fit for. The animal which is an ayla, chatas, and shlamim, we use the animals for those. But what's the problem? Amai. So says Rav Papa back to Rav Rashi, but why is that? Ha'amrit, you should say, behema lav k'bevareshes dami. You just told me that it's ayla is only, that money is the only thing that is stam, but anything else has a din of mefurash. So if behema now will have a din of mefurash, so these 3 animals should as well, like you, Rav Sim Verashi, just suggested, these 3 animals should be considered mefurash as an ayla, chatas, and shlamim. But we don't know which is which. So we should not be allowed to go and say, this is the ayla, this is the chatas, this is the shlamim. We should be messed up. But we see clearly from the Mishnah Daf Memei, it's not true. So Rav Papa retorts back to Rav Sim Verashi, your premise is obviously wrong. Amar Le, Rav Simi responds, no. Some 2 lines from the bottom. Over there, in the case of the birds, V'lokach v'asa amar achmana. The Torah says he has to take, and the kohen has to make the carbon. Ib l'kiach has bailim, ib asi has kohen. And for there we learn out that when it comes to designated which kain, which bird is which is the chatas or which is the ayla, that either goes by the lekichas of the bailim, the owner, or the kain decides. So we see clearly that the kain is allowed to be the one. So hachanami, so too over here says Rav Siva Rashi to Rav Papa, mi matzis, as we turn over to Chav Zayin, Amid, base, mi matzis amrit, hadein dechatas, tikare vayla. Are you able to say that the one is the chatas should be the ayla? The animal which is suitable to be the chatas is the chatas. The animal which is suitable to be the ayla is the ayla. Apologies that we're having issues over here with the highlighting and the video disappeared. Hopefully we'll figure this out. But as well, I believe the audio should be working. So mi matis amr, it says of Simi Rashi, can you possibly say Hadin dechatas tekari vayla? Can't be. And that's the reason why that when you designate it to be part of the carbon, it's by its very definition explaining that which it's going to be. And therefore it says, if Simi Rashi, the different karbanos. And therefore, what's the reason? The chatas is a nekeva, the oila is a zachar. So Shimon Gamliel must be only in this case, and therefore Shimon Gamliel's din that you just quoted me from the Mishnah Daf Mem Hey is not a question at all to the way that I, Rav Sim Rashi, am explaining. And with that we continue, Masiv Rav Hamnuna. Again, we're on Chav Zayin Amid Beis, 2 lines from the top. The highline is not working, but either way, let's continue. Masiv Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna asks the following question, and this goes back to the din that we just said of Ma'is V'loi Behema. And the din of Ma'is of V'loi Behema was further qualified as what type of Behema? Was it only a Behema Tam? Or was it even a Behema Balmum? And this was where the Rav Nachman and Chavavam and Beis qualified the din of Rav Huna. And he said that Rav Huna's din is only by Behema Tam. But by Behema Balmum, then it's not lacking anything. Because a Behema Balmum can be sold readily, and therefore it's the din of Ma'is. To explain one drop deeper, what is this whole din of Ma'is Stumim? Is that I have money, it has no purpose, so I'm allowed to take the money with no purpose, and I'm going to designate this money to be used for whatever karbanos I need, and therefore if the owner is no longer with us, that is used Yiplul and Adava for karbanos of Oila. So says Rav Nachman yesterday, explaining Rav Huna, that this, Rav Nachman saying Rav Huna, that when it comes to an animal, if it's an animal that's a tam, that could be a carbon, then it does not have a din of money. Why not? Because you can't just readily exchange that animal for the animals that you need. You have to wait for it to get a malmum before you exchange it. However, says Rav Nachman, but if the animal already has a mum, then what's the difference in an animal with a mum and cash? Both of them are used readily to buy an animal, and therefore that would have the same din as Ma'is Stumim. So now Chav Zayin Mabeis asks Rav Huna, Omiya Amrinan, but do we say Behema Abalas Mum Kistuma Damya? You just told me, Rav Nachman, is that accurate? That a behema with a mum is like a din of Stuma, that it's like a din of money, meaning that it can easily be used to purchase whatever karbanis you want, and therefore the halach l'moshe v'sina will apply that if the owner is no longer here, I'll be yiblu nadava for the oila, for the kaitzim mizbeach. Tashema, I'll ask you for the following brayso, 4 lines down, Chav Zayin Mebeis. Keitzad amru ish megaleach al naziros. In what case did they say that one shaves his head, meaning he does all the concluding things he has to do when he finishes Naziros, al Naziros aviv? When do we say that he could give himself a haircut, he could bring the karbanos when it's referencing his father's Naziros? Bizman, in the following case, Sheyehov aviv Nazir, he and his father are Nazirim. Now, or aviv Nazir is easier girsa, so let's just read that girsa. Vehefresh aviv mai, so the father's a Nazir. The father separates money l'nazirusay for his Nazirus. Umeis, and then what happens? The father is nifter. V'amar, and the father says, Hareini Nazir al menash galeach al mois abba. So now the father's nifter. There's money left alone. That money was money set aside as a karbanis of a Nazir. And the son says, I'm going to become a Nazir, and I'm going to eventually, when my Nazirus ends, I will use the money of my father to buy the karbanis for the karbanis of the Nazirus. In that specific scenario, then, Hare, one second, I don't know if I skipped, one more time. So now the we have ma'is tumin, yiplu linidava. What is the halacha in this case? Again, we're having girsa issues over here. One more time. I skipped a line, right? Because this base over here the Bach on the side, a little bit confusing, throws in the words, Ein zeh migaleach. One second, one more time. Hu v'aviv Nazirim. I want to try to read this in the right way. Let's go back. 4 lines from the top. Again. Keitzad amru eish migaleach al Nazir's aviv. Biznan sheyahu v'aviv Nazirim, or aviv Nazir. Ve'evish aviv ma'is Nazirusay. Umeis. V'amar ini nazan shegleach al ma'is abba. Harei zeh migaleach al ma'is abba. Then he's able to. Aval im amru. But if he says, let's say he and his father are already Nazirim. And the father dies. And then the son who was already a Nazir said, then Yiplu linidava. The money goes to Nidava. Meaning, the son was already a Nazir, and now the son is just trying to piggyback and trying to use the money from his father's karbanos for his Naziris. That does not work. Now let's say the father had specified animals, and this is the point that we're bringing a kasha from. Chatos, what's halacha tam? Have to die. Ayla tikarev, ayla shlamim, tikarev shlamim. So my love. Afilu balas mum. We think right now, even though the animal that the father separated might have a mum, still, what's the story? The animal does not have the same din as Mo'is Stam, but asks Rav Lamnuna to Rav Nachman from yesterday's daf. You, Rav Nachman, taught if the animal has a mum, has the regular status of Mo'is Stumim. But we see from this brisa that's not true, because seemingly this brisa is referring to behema balmum. It does not have the din of ma'is. Answers the Gemara loy tamima. We're dealing with a behema without a blemish, a tam. Asks the Gemara, asks Rav Amnuna, avol balas mom kistuma damya. So you're telling me the brisa is talking about a behema without a mum. But what would the diuk? What's the inference? Instead of it has a mum, then it will yes have a din of regular money. So my area ma'is. Why does the Brisa say a case specifically of money? Why doesn't it specify this case that if there is a case of an animal with a mum, that animal should go l'nedava? Answers the Gemara, it does. This case is included. Lamai kadisha. With regard to with regard to what is it considered a kadosh, its value. Hainu ma'is. The Brisa said the word ma'is to include not just cash, anything with monetary value, answers Rav Nachman. And therefore, a behema balas mum will be the same thing, and therefore Rav Nachman's din stands the test of time. And we continue, Masiv Rava. Now, Rava is about to ask a kasha. Rava is going to quote a Brisa that's going to go all the way onto tomorrow's Amud Aleph, all the way to the Mishnah. But the basic gist of the kasha of Rava is going to be this din that we just spoke about. This din that a behema with a mum has a din of money, ma'is stam, asks Rava, we see from the Brisa that it is not true. So Masiv Rava, karbanai bekarbanai. The Torah says karbanai, his karban. So Rava, the Brisa explains, bekarbanayu yaitse v'ini yaitse bekarbanav. One only fulfills the obligation with his own karban, not the karban of his father. So Yachal, I would think, lo yatsa bekarbanai shel avriv. I would think the only time you're not yaitse with the karban of your father is when shefer shmina kalu ala chamura. That is, a father separated the animal for a minor avera and you want to use it for a stringent avera. Oy mina chamura ala kal. Or he set aside for a stringent avera, you want to use it for a lenient avera. Avol yoytze bekarban shefish avim min akala la kala oy min achamura la chamura. But you would think if it's the same level of avera, then you could use the money, the karban of the father. Talmud loymar karbanoi bekarbanoi yoytze v'enu yoytze bekarbanoi shel avim. And the truth is, we really could stop over here, because what do we see in this case? We see in this case, it says that you can't use your father's behema for a karban. you can't use. No, we actually don't see this yet. We have to read one more line. Yachol continues the Braisa. Lo yatsa b'karban aviv b'beheima she'efresh. You would think if the father set aside an animal, the son cannot use it. Afilu min hakal al hakal min chamura al chamura. Sharei, what's the reason? Because you can't use your father's karbanos for your naziros. Avol yoytze b'moi sheveshavim min afilu min chamura al hakal min hakal al chamura she'adam megalecha mal zav bin naziros. On top of Amid Zayin, we don't have the Chav Chesam and Aleph. Bisman shein istumim lo bisman shein mefurashin. Tamaloi mar karbanoi. Ber karbanoi yoytze v'in yoytze b'karbanoi aviv. Even when it comes to the cash. But what do we see over here clearly in this part of the Braisa? We're going to stop with this. We see that there's a very big difference between money and behema. Because this case of the Braisa, 6 lines on the bottom, said if the father is a behema shefresh, it's going to have a different din of moi shefresh. The problem is, based on the din of Rav Nachman, there should be absolutely no difference if the Braisa is talking about a behema bal mom. And the Gemara tomorrow is going to answer, no, it's talking about a behema tam. And the same answer that we just gave, that when it says demei, when it says the value, it says the ma'is, it means the value, and that includes even a behema bal mom. We'll pick it up from Daf Chav Ches in the next year. B'siyata Tishmaya.